Yeah, people come to art crime talks, and they're very interested in art history. And art history is an interesting topic. I mean, we've all known about the fact that Van Gogh cut off his ear, at the end, during his lifetime. There was all kinds of stories about Monet. Of course, he was blinded at the end, painting with basically no sight. Renoir had arthritis so badly in his hands, he had to actually tie brushes to his wrist to be able to paint. And then the loves lost, the lives of the artists. These are all the parts of art history. But when we talk about art crime, all right, we're not talking about art history. We're talking about the business of art, the business of art. And it's a big business. Worldwide, it's a $200 billion worldwide industry. When I say 200 billion worldwide art industry, I'm not just talking about sculptures, prints, and paintings. I'm also talking about the collectibles industry. When we talk about the collectibles industry, we look at baseball cards. Who would have thought that baseball cards would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars? Or first edition comic books that sold for 12 cents back in the day are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of these pieces are part of the cultural property collections of the world. And so when the FBI or any law enforcement agency talks about art crime, it's cultural property crime. It involves all these types of things. Antiquities from South America, from the Middle East, Asian antiquities. These are all part of art crime. So that business, the legitimate business, is a $200 billion worldwide industry. Every year, $200 billion is bought and sold worldwide. The United States represents 40%. We're the largest consumer country in the world when it comes to the cultural property market, the legitimate market. $80 billion a year approximately is what we buy and sell. It's our financial market. So we're the largest in the world. We consume the most of any country. Now, the estimates, according to the FBI, according to other law enforcement agencies, is that the illicit cultural property market, the criminal market, is about $6 billion a year. 6 billion. That's pretty big. That's with a B, not an M. 6 billion a year. And that ranks in the top 10 of criminal organizations, criminal enterprises worldwide. 6 billion a year, top 10 of the criminal enterprises worldwide. Now, I'm going to tell you straight up, about 75% of that loss, that cultural property loss, is not theft. It's not looted antiquities. It's not stealing. What it is fraud. It's frauds, forgeries, and fakes. So, do we have any collectors here? Anybody collect anything? There you go. A couple people collect. I know you do. Everybody does. All right. I mean, I sit here and I say, well, who's a collector? If you have 4 or 5 pairs of Jimmy Choo shoes, ladies, you're a collector. Or hey, guys, if you like watches, if you collect watches, you're a collector. Everybody's into something. And one way or the other, you end up being a collector. And what happens is the biggest part of the crime market is these frauds. It's people going out and buying things that they think are legitimate and that are not real. So 75% of that $6 billion. So what I would tell you is this. If you're going to buy a Picasso on eBay, make sure there's 2 S's in Picasso, okay, when it says it. Or if you're going to buy a Monet, make sure there's no A. There's no A in Monet. It's a Monet, all right? I mean, we laugh, but believe me, these things do happen. The largest complaints to the FBI Cybercrime Center are eBay fraud. That's the most amount of complaints that come in. And it's not because there's anything wrong with eBay. eBay is a good platform for selling. It's because some of the people who go on eBay to sell these items are committing the frauds, and people are getting ripped off. So just be really, really careful. If the deal is too good to be true, remember what your mother told you? It's probably not real. So be careful when we're talking about these frauds, forgeries, and fakes. Now, there are certain art theft crimes, violations, that the FBI, Homeland Security, and other national, international police departments look into. In the United States, interstate transportation of stolen property is one of these crimes. And what that basically says is that if someone steals a piece of property, doesn't matter if it's a Chevrolet or a Monet, okay, and it's worth $5,000 or more, and they knowingly transport it across a state or international border, they're committing a federal crime. And that crime can be investigated by the FBI, which is what you want. You want the federal government to come in and be able to investigate these crimes because they can put a lot of resources behind it and sources to help you solve these crimes. The second one up there is called the theft of major artwork. That's an interesting one. I'm going to leave that for a moment because we're going to come back to it because that has a lot of interesting parts to it. Another one up there is Hobbs Act robbery. That says if someone robs an institution, like a gallery, so to speak. If someone goes into a gallery and they do an armed robbery, that could be a federal crime because they are interfering in interstate commerce. All right, that's part of the Commerce Clause. So what happens? Well, I'll tell you, we had a case involving a number of individuals in Philadelphia a few years ago, many years ago actually, who were doing jewelry store robberies. So they were doing smash and grabs all over the country. In fact, in California, in many states. Up the first year that we looked into these individuals, they had done 100 smash and grab jewelry store robberies. So we, the FBI, created a task force with the Philadelphia Major Crimes Police Department investigative unit. And we went after these individuals. Well, we couldn't catch them. Couldn't figure out who they were, what they were doing. Had some ideas, but we couldn't catch them. Well, ultimately, one of them made a big mistake. He went and robbed a McDonald's. All right, he robbed a McDonald's. And when he did that, he put his finger on the counter and said, put the money right here. Well, that, of course, allowed us to get a fingerprint. We identified him. We were able to charge him with a Hobbs Act robbery because he was interfering in interstate commerce. Because the beef in that McDonald's didn't come from Pennsylvania. I don't know where it came from, but it didn't come from Pennsylvania. So as a result, we could charge him in interference in interstate commerce. He flipped for us. We ended up arresting more than 100 people that were involved in these interstate thefts. What they were doing is going out doing these smash and grab robberies, stealing material, Rolex watches, jewelry, bringing them back to Philadelphia and fencing them on the Jewelers Row, which is a very big area in Central City, Philadelphia, where they have jewelry stores. And they had a number of jewelers who were fencing for them. So the next year, there was only 3 cases that we had. So we stopped the whole criminal enterprise, using that statute, the Hobbs Act robbery statute. It's used all over the country today. Of course, then there's smuggling. How many of you travel outside the country? There you go. And do you ever buy like souvenirs? Yeah. You bring them back? There you go. Okay. Well, you have to be careful because I think at this point, the United States has treaties with 17 different countries, which makes it illegal to bring artifacts, antiquities back from those countries. For instance, Italy, China, Greece, Thailand, Guatemala, Peru, all have treaties with the U.S. So when you go buy an artifact outside the country and you bring it in, you could be smuggling. You could be breaking the law. So you have to be very, very careful. Before you travel, before you buy things, make sure you know what the situation is, what the laws are that are going to, govern those pieces. I'll give you just an instance. If you go to London and you say you go to one of the flea markets in London, in London you can buy Roman coins. Well, just as a aside, if you buy a Roman coin and bring it back to the United States, basically we have a treaty against that. All right, that's considered illegal to bring into the country. Why? Because it's from Italy. Now, that Roman coin may never have even been in Italy because they actually minted those for the legions that were living in England, well, the UK at the time, not the UK, England, I guess it was. So they minted it for them there, and it may never have been in Italy, but it's considered part of Italian cultural heritage. So a Roman coin coming from London could be illegal. So you have to be careful. Be careful that you know what you're getting into before you bring it back. Now, are you going to get in trouble for that? Probably not. What will happen is they'll seize it. The customs will take it, and then you'll have an opportunity to get an attorney and fight for it if you want. But, it's probably not going to work because it's what it is and where it's from. So it doesn't actually have to come from the country. You see? You could buy one in Munich, in the Friedrichstrasse at the antique shops and bring it back. It's still Italian cultural heritage. So be careful when it comes to smuggling. We don't think of it, but that could be the situation. Now, I call the mail fraud and wire fraud the white-collar crimes of art crime. Mail fraud used to be the use of the U.S. mail, FedEx, UPS, any ground or air carrier, and that's a situation. Now, today, mail and wire mostly, and wire used to be newspapers, radio, television, and telephone, but today, mostly, it is the internet. It's emails. So emails are important. So if you're going to make a big purchase, if you're going to buy a piece that is worth X amount of dollars, it's precious to you, make sure you get a contract in the mail. whether it's by, by hard copy or by wire through the internet. Get a contract. Make sure that everything in that contract tells you exactly, spells out exactly what you're doing and what you're buying. Because if anything in that is fraudulent, in other words, if there's something in there that's not true, and you depend upon that to make the purchase, and it turns out that what you bought wasn't real, you have the protection of wire fraud and mail fraud statutes. Okay, so be careful. I'm trying to keep you out of trouble. Okay, you don't want to be that victim. Don't be that guy or that gal. So those are the interesting art theft statutes that have been around for a long time. The newest one is the second one up there, called the Theft of Major Artwork Statute. And that was passed around 1996 in the Omnibus Crime Bill at that time. And what it was put forth by Senator Ted Kennedy from Massachusetts, actually Boston. And basically what it says, if someone goes into a museum in the United States and they steal an object of cultural heritage, and that's defined like this: it's any item in the care and custody of a U.S. museum that's worth $5,000 and over 100 years old. $5,000 over 100 years old. Or any item that's in the care and custody of a museum in the United States that's worth $100,000, any age. That's considered an object of cultural heritage. As a result, that's a federal crime, punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison. All right, so now it's a federal crime to go into a museum and steal. Never used to be. Up until 1996, it was a local crime. It was basically a theft, a local theft. Now it's a federal violation. Now, why would you think Ted Kennedy from Boston would want to make it a federal crime? How many people here have heard of the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist? There you go, a couple of you. How many people haven't heard of it? Excellent. Okay, for your edification, then, I'm going to tell you what happened. Back in 1990, two individuals dressed as Boston police officers on St. Patrick's Day night, or going into the morning after 1 a.m., they went to the museum and they tricked the two guards there to let them into the museum as Boston cops. They told the guards that they had an arrest warrant from one of them and needed to do an investigation. So the two guards let them in. Of course, they weren't cops, they were thieves. And what did they do? They tied these guards up in the basement up to different pipes, and then for the next hour and some odd minutes went throughout the museum and stole 13 objects of art. Now, one of these pieces was a Vermeer, one of only 30 some in the world. I think maybe 35 maybe, and it's the only one that's missing. It's called the Concert, and it's considered a masterpiece. Another one was a Rembrandt Seascape, The Storm over the Sea of Galilee. It's the only seascape known by Rembrandt. That was taken as well. Both were stolen. At the time, the heist was a $300 million art heist. That was the value of the paintings. Today, they're up to $500 million. None of them have been recovered. That makes that the single largest property crime in U.S. history. So who would think an art heist would be the single largest property crime in U.S. history? And the other thing that's interesting about it, there's a $10 million reward for any information leading to the recovery of the paintings. So what I always say is, if any of you know where they're at, let's talk, all right? Or anybody who's out there, let's talk about it. Because at this point, there has been some immunity offers. And if someone has information, those paintings could bring you a ton of money if you have the information and it turns out. So the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist is the largest art heist in U.S. history, probably the largest, other than Nazi looted art, in the world. Today it's valued at $500 million. None of the paintings have been recovered after 30 years, and there's a $10 million reward. So as a result, Congress in 1996 passed the Theft of Major Artwork Statute. Now, they were smart, because the theft had occurred 6 years before. But what they did was they put a Part B to that law. There's two parts. It's 18 U.S.C. 668 for any of those who are attorneys. You can look it up. There's an A and B. It's a very short statute. Part B is anyone who possesses, attempts to sell, attempts to exhibit, or do anything with an object of cultural heritage stolen from a museum is committing a federal crime. All right, so it makes it a crime to possess it. Now that's new. Up until that time, it would have been a situation where you could have had a good faith buyer situation. There would be a civil case. Now it's a federal crime to possess it. So if you're going to go out and do buy an object of art, be careful. Make sure you know where it comes from. It's called due diligence and provenance history. Make sure you know where it comes from. So you're not the guy who has bought this piece and now it gets seized by the feds because it's stolen from a museum sometime 50 years ago. Doesn't matter when it was stolen, okay? It doesn't matter when it was stolen. It's the fact that you're possessing, and that's an ongoing crime. Now, there's no statute of limitations, basically, because if you have it, every day you have it, you're committing the crime. You see? So it's a situation where you have to be careful now. I had a case where I was involved in a case of a Renoir that was stolen back in 1950 from the Baltimore Museum of Art. It was found at an auction getting ready to come up for sale in Washington, D.C., and it was identified, and at which point it was seized. The people who bought it said they had bought it at a flea market, and they were going to sell this little Renoir through the auction. Well, it was seized. They didn't lose a whole lot of money because they didn't pay much for it at the flea market. But you can see how that's a problem. They had to turn it over right away because it was stolen from a museum in 1950, and this is only a couple of years ago, and was recovered and given back. Of course, the insurance company had paid off. They got their money back from the museum, and now it's back in the museum. So you see how that works. You've got to be careful. Make sure you know what you're buying. Make sure you know that when you're overseas, you're not bringing something back in the country that's banned, okay? It's contraband. Be careful of that. So know what you're buying. Now, the public resources for your protections are the National Art Crime Team with the FBI. That's one of the public resources. The team started in 2005. What had happened was I came back from doing a case in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm going to talk about that case a little bit later. And we came back and we looked around, and basically in the United States, there was two men doing these investigations. Myself in Philadelphia and another fellow named Jim up in New York. So here we are with 40% of the art market of the world, largest consumer country, and basically we had two guys doing all the art heist investigations, or at least coordinating them. You know, as compared to, say, Italy, where there are 300 carabinieri that do nothing but art theft investigations worldwide, all but mostly in Italy, but worldwide, 300. That's all they do. In the OCBC in Paris, there's 35 members of the Paris police squad and the gendarmerie working together. There's 35 that do that. Two squads in Madrid, of course, this famous squad of Art and Antique squad in London. They exist. At that time, the United States, we didn't have anybody that was specific. So we went to headquarters at that time in 2005, and we said, look, we need to come up with a new team that we can go out and train and have them do these types of investigations, because it's important. It's important to recover cultural property. So the Bureau was open to it. They actually agreed. And that first team had 8 agents that we picked up around the country. We took them to where I was in Philadelphia, and we gave them training at the University of Pennsylvania, at the Barnes Foundation, and also at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And we were able to train them up a bit. Now, I have to admit, by the time they were done, being at the Barnes Foundation, there's such a fantastic collection there. I'm really partial to it. These 8 FBI criminal investigators, division investigators, they could actually tell the difference between, say, a Renoir and a Picasso, which to a lot of art historians might not mean much, you know, or a Miro and a Monet, but they could tell the difference because they'd seen so many at the museum. But that's a good thing, because now you're starting to train the eye, and that was the whole idea. So it worked out really well. We brought them there, we set them up. I have to show you this. This is the Art Crime Team logo. It's still in existence at headquarters. If you go to the FBI.gov website, you will see that logo. It's still there. That was the top 10 art crimes, art pieces that were missing at the time in 2005. And I have to tell you, we're really happy because this is back. That was a Da Vinci stolen in Scotland. It's been recovered. Of course, this is the Scream. Some of you might have remembered that was stolen at the time in Oslo, Norway, and that actually has been recovered. This piece up here is called Cellini's Salt Cellar. It's a golden statue. Fantastic piece. It was stolen from a museum in Vienna. That too has been recovered, and this piece is a Van Gogh, the thing right behind the T. It's a landscape, and that was stolen from the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and it's been recovered. It was recovered just about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, in the basement of a mafia boss's mother's house in Sicily. So that's been recovered as well. So I'm happy to say that 4 out of the 10 pieces that were our top 10 art crimes, 4 of the top 10 have been recovered. Now, the FBI had nothing to do with any of them, but we had them on our logo. So as a result, we get credit for that too, right? Because we had them on our logo. But that's your public resource. That's the FBI art crime team. That's who you want to talk to if you have that situation occur. But there are limitations to law enforcement. And what I would tell everyone, in my 20 years at the FBI from 1988 to 2008, I got a lot of calls from people who would say to me, Mr. Wittman or Agent Wittman, we have a problem. We can't identify this painting. Or my cousin says it belongs to him and I think it belongs to me. All kinds of litigation and problems. Civil problems. Probably 75% of all the problems in the art market are not criminal, okay? And so what happens is this. Law enforcement can only get involved if there's a criminal allegation. Remember I told you about the cases, those statutes? Well, the elements of those statutes have to be part of the complaint. If not, then what happens is these things cannot be investigated by the law enforcement. So there are limitations, big limitations. So probably 75 to 80% of the calls I got, I couldn't help people over the 20 years. I couldn't help them because they weren't criminal. So as a result, when I got out of the FBI in 2008, I retired. I started my own company, Robert Wittman Incorporated, and we do such things as art recovery services. We do investigations looking into art. We do security for museums, for galleries, for homes, depending on the situations. We do surveys to make sure you're properly secured. Collection management services. I'll give you a quick tale about that since we're having fun just talking tales. I had a call from a woman in Maryland who had a collection of steamer trunks in her basement, and it was a farmhouse. Basically, it was a dirt farmhouse, dirt floors, foundation of the house, just wide open. Totally no HVAC, nothing like that. So we went in and we looked at these steamer trunks. There's probably dozens of them from the 1930s. We started cutting the locks off and we opened them up. And what we found were thousands of first edition books. Pieces like the first editions of Moby Dick, Edgar Allan Poe's books. Their family had been collecting books for 200 years. And they had original pages from the Gutenberg Bible, just to give you an idea. Millions of dollars worth of books. Now these things were all in these old 1930 steamer crates. They had no protection. We took them all out. We put them into good conservation packaging, made sure that they were properly sealed, and cleaned, got her an appraisal. And then, of course, we moved it into storage, right? Well, no, she said put them in the bedroom, so we did, okay, in the end. So hopefully they're still there, we hope. But anyway, that's collection management for people who don't know what they have or who actually want to sell things and do it, transparently so you know exactly what's going on. The art market's very opaque. It's a black hole. So when you do buy and sell in the art market, many times you're going to be dealing with dealers and whatnot who are not going to tell you, well, they're not going to tell you everything. So we try to stop that by making everything very, very transparent. So we do that as well as part of the collection management. We do due diligence and provenance reviews. We protect people from being the holders of criminal material, in the end, and making sure they don't lose their money when they buy material. We do a lot of expert witness testimony in trials and cases, many in New York City for the art market there. Now, we also do TV shows. This was a show I did a few years ago for the History Channel called Custer's Last Stand or whatever. We were looking for relics from the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and we write books. This is my latest book. Came out in 2016. It's called The Devil's Diary. And what it is, basically, it's a story of a diary that we recovered for the U.S. Holocaust Museum 5 years after I retired from the FBI in 2013. This diary was 400 pages. It was written by Alfred Rosenberg. Now, Rosenberg is not as famous as Göring and some of the other, Nazis from the Second World War, but he was just as important. Rosenberg was the chief philosopher, socialist for the Nazi Party. He was there in 1919 when the party started. He was actually one of the first editors of a Nazi newspaper. And so when young Adolf Hitler came to the party in 1919, 1918 to see what was going on, Rosenberg took him under his wing and trained him. In many respects, Alfred Rosenberg is the man who turned Hitler into Hitler, the one we know today. And so as a result, his teachings, his ideas, his philosophies were all adopted by the Nazis. He became the minister of the East, the head of the East during the Second World War. He was in charge of Poland. He was in charge of Russia. He was in charge of Romania, all those areas in the East. And he also directed the ERR, which was the group that took the art and artifacts from Europe and basically looted them and stole them to create the Hitler Museum. So Rosenberg was a big figure during the war. And in 1945, his diary was captured by General Patton's troops. It was used at the Nuremberg trials. He was one of the first 10 to be hung as a war criminal. But then all of a sudden it disappeared. And it ended up being taken by one of the prosecutors at the Nuremberg trials, one of the American prosecutors for that matter, and he brought it home. So the diary was very important because it had never been transcribed or translated. So nobody really knew what was in it. So we recovered that in 2013 as working with the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. And when we did, it was important because for the first time, we got to see what was actually in the diary and what he was writing. This diary was written, at night, 400 pages over the course of 10 years about the meetings that Rosenberg was having with Hitler at the time, the lunches, the discussions about all different types of subjects. So that's why it was so important. It was a first-hand discovery of what was actually being done. And it was actually being written by Rosenberg for himself. These are some of the paintings you can see that Rosenberg was involved with stealing and looting. And today, Nazi looted art is still out there. It's still being recovered, and it's still a big problem for collectors and for families. This is what the diary looked like. So as I said, the Rosenberg diary that we wrote, the book we wrote, actually takes the pages, translates them, and then we put them in perspective of what was going on during the war on the days that they were writing those pages, so that you can see exactly what the highest individuals in the Third Reich were thinking, okay, not saying, but thinking to themselves as these events were going on. Rosenberg is the one who came up with the idea of the ladder of the races. He came up with the idea of getting rid of the Jews out of Europe, knocking them all out of Europe. It was his deputies that were at the Wannsee conference when they discussed the destruction of the Jews. He didn't go. He sent his deputies. So these individuals were very much involved in all of these situations. So we did that book in 2016. It's now published in 29 countries around the world.
Because, from the movies, you see, a grid of lasers and Catherine Zeta-Jones puts on a skin-tight suit and somehow showing her butt helps get her through the grid.
Yeah, that's what we think about when we think about art crime, isn't it? Art theft is kind of a sexy thing. It's a Hollywood thing. It's interesting. And of course, throughout the years, there's been a lot of Hollywood art thieves, haven't there? So what Stephen Colbert was just talking about was Catherine Zeta-Jones and Sean Connery. What was the movie? Do you remember? Anybody remember the movie? Entrapment. Good memory. Good for you. Good. Okay, yeah, that was a great movie. Very interesting when it came to art theft. And who's the guy in the middle? Do we know? Thomas Crown Affair. That's right. Pierce Brosnan, right? Pierce Brosnan. And then, of course, on the end is when I talk to colleges, right? The young people don't know who that is. Now, there's a lot of young people here today, but there's a couple of us oldies here. Who remembers that guy? Who is it? Cary Grant, Catch a Thief. Yeah, good for you. Who said that? Put your hand up. Okay, good. Good for you. You've seen the movie. Very good. Love it. Okay. So these are our Hollywood art thieves. They're handsome. They're debonair. They're beautiful. They're intelligent. They're obviously very, very wealthy and rich. These are what we think of. These are our Hollywood art thieves. It's a little bit different. It's not quite the same, is it? Not quite the same. These are real art thieves. These are people who are actually involved in different types of thefts. And I can tell you, this is 3 different groups. These 3 individuals were working together. You can kind of see from it's a clue because you look at their outfits, they kind of match up. These 2 guys were working together as well. He was by himself, but they all represent about $4 million worth of stolen art and cultural property. Some of it very, very historic cultural property. So that's the real art thieves. They're not handsome, debonair, and beautiful people. They are people who are desperate, and then people who think they can make a buck by stealing your cultural heritage and history. And that's what art thieves do. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of cases. This particular case is an international art smuggling case. It involved a piece of gold. This piece of gold was the largest piece of gold ever found in a tomb in the Americas. In fact, this tomb, which was discovered in 1988, had more gold in it than King Tut's tomb. And I know that because it said it in the National Geographic. Okay? So I'm telling you, it had more gold in it than King Tut's tomb. Who would have thought, though, that, a Peruvian tomb, in South America would have more gold than King Tut? Well, this one did. And the way it was discovered, it wasn't like King Tut. What happened here was there were a group of huaqueros. Huaqueros in Peru are basically grave robbers. They go in, they have these long poles, and they try to find Incan graves or any type of ancient graves to try to find antiquities to sell to the market. A normal piece, a textile, maybe a bowl or pot that they haven't broken, might go to them for $30 to $35. They'll get that much for it. To them, that's riches. Okay, that's enough to support their family for a week. So that's why they go out and they do this at night. Well, this particular group of huaqueros, they found this place. It was a mound, and inside that mound was the gold of Sipan, it was called. So this Sipan site was probably the largest gold site ever discovered, as I say, in the Americas. There actually were 3 different tombs. 2 were actually dug out at one point, but this one actually was the first one that was hit. And you can see where Sipan is. It's located right here in the northern coast of Peru. Now, they went in. At one point, they were stealing about 60% of everything that was in that specific tomb, and they got away with the material. The piece that we went after was called a back flap. And as I say, it's a piece of body armor, which is the largest piece of gold ever found in the Americas. And it was used to cover the king, the Moche king. His name was Moche. It was 2,000 years ago, his backside, 2,000 years ago, when he went into battle. Of course, he never went into battle because that was made out of gold. He just kind of directed the battle, but he looked good. All right, so this particular piece was discovered and was stolen from that particular tomb. This is just a blow-up of what the tomb would have looked like at the time. He was buried with his dogs, he was buried with his doctors, his guards. It wasn't good to be the king's doctor when he died. Wasn't a good thing. But anyway, he was buried with them. And of course, you can see the outfits and these fantastic pieces. These are ear pieces and back flaps and peanut pieces that were set up as necklaces. Just magnificent material. All that was found in the tomb. Another recreation of what the tomb would have looked like. So these international art smugglers decided they were going to take this particular piece, this back flap, and try to sell it. So they contacted an undercover company we had Miami. The FBI had Miami and said, we're interested in importing, exporting, and we need to find someone who's interested in gold from Peru. So the FBI called me. I was the undercover agent working those types of cases. So I met with these guys and started discussions on what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do was bring the piece up, and we met them on exit 7 at the New Jersey Turnpike. We sat at the table, we talked about it. The 2 of the guys were here on the right. That was another agent who was working with me. His job was, because he spoke Spanish, both of these guys were from Miami, they were speaking Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. So he was supposed to let me know if they started talking about guns or anything, okay? So at that point, we discussed it. They said to me, well, we have this piece. We want to bring it into the country. We have a mule, just somebody who can smuggle it. And he works at the Panamanian consulate in New York City. And he'll go down to Panama, get it into Panama, and bring it up. We said, how much do you want? He said, $1.6 million. So, okay, if you bring it in, we'll give you $1.6 million for it. I think we can sell it. I have a client, his name is the Gold Man. And as a result, this person will buy all the gold you have. So they said, okay. They left. Now, I didn't think they were going to be able to do it. Quite honestly, I thought it was just, they were just talking outside off the top of their heads, not able. But about 2 weeks later, they called me. So we did it. We brought the piece. It said the Panamanian consulate in New York City. Do you want to come up and bring the money? Well, of course, there was a problem. We can't do law enforcement operations inside consulates and embassies in the United States, mostly because if we do it to them, they'll do it to us. So as a result, I said, no, bring the piece back down to the Jersey Turnpike. We'll take a look at it and authenticate it, and we'll give you half the money there. And I said, well, the other half we'll send to your friends, whoever needs that. So give us their bank account numbers, and we'll be happy to do that. I didn't say they were smart. I just said they were smugglers. So they agreed. So they said they would do that. So we got all their information. We got all these people that were involved with them. They met me at the Jersey Turnpike again. And you can see here is what the operation was going on. And they brought down a fellow with them who was actually driving them down. It's this man right here. And as it turned out, and I was thinking they were going to come down in a small little rental car or something. They came down in a limo. basically. And they met me at the site. We walked over, we opened up the trunk of the car, and inside the trunk of the car was a suitcase. They opened up the suitcase and there was underwear, okay? And underneath the underwear was this golden back flap, 2.5 pounds of gold, stolen made 2,000 years ago and stolen in 1988. This is 12 years later in New Jersey. So the person who was with them was this individual. He was the mule. And it turned out his name was Francisco Iglesias. He was the actual consul general for the Panamanian consulate in New York City. So it wasn't just some low-level person. And I know because he gave me his card, to introduce himself to me, to invite me to come to Panama someday. Because, I was this rich guy who could buy, gold like that. So as a result, we were able to arrest these individuals, charge them with crimes. And here you can see what it looked like with the back flap inside the actual suitcase, wrapped up over top the underwear. Here again is what it looks like. It's almost 2,000 years old, as I say, largest piece of gold ever recovered. This made a big dent in the diplomatic community because of the fact that when a diplomat gets caught doing this, it really scares everybody off. And that way we let everybody know, let all the different countries and diplomats know this is not a good idea. So this was a major case involving that. This is another piece that had fallen off the backside of the piece, but we were able to recover that as well. These were the individuals that were arrested. And of course, even today, our consul general, he had fled within 3 days, so we weren't able to maintain or arrest him and keep him. He's indicted, he's wanted, and he's in Panama. So if he ever leaves that country, and comes to, let's say, Disney World, have a problem. You can't go to Disneyland. And it's important that we do it. This was the archaeologist, Walter Alva, who came and looked at the piece and authenticated it. He was from Peru. And then the University of Pennsylvania actually created a brochure and an exhibition to show the importance of the return of cultural property. And, I have this picture. I took this picture in Cusco. This is the person that we recovered that for. Because when Walter came and saw the piece, he said to me, Mr. Wittman, the recovery of that back flap is as important to us as if someone stole your Liberty Bell. If someone came in the night, stole your Liberty Bell, took it away for many years, and then we were able to recover that, it's just as important to us as that Liberty Bell would have been to you, because that's our history. And that shows the advancement that we had thousands of years ago. And this little fellow or lady, I don't even know what it is here, that's who we recovered it for, because she or he would have hope in the future, because her cultures were able to create that type of art 1,000 years ago and still look forward to today and tomorrow. So that's why it's important to recover stolen art. That's why it's important to be ever vigilant that what you're buying and what you're selling is legitimate, that it's legal, and do your due diligence. Do I think the Gardner paintings will be recovered? I think that if people are diligent and keep a good eye lookout, that is a good possibility. I think they still exist. I have some worries about 2 of the paintings that were cut out of their frames, because throughout my career I've seen that happen, and as a result, with improper, HVAC care and improper conservation, they are destroyed. But I'm thinking that the ones that, like the Vermeer, was taken on the stretcher, so as a result, that could come back.
Okay. Questions from the room?
I'm curious what happens to the people who commit these crimes and are caught, and also the people who buy them. Is there, if they're potentially innocent of not knowing that they were stolen, are they let go and they just lose the property if they paid for it, or is there some other action that's taken?
Yeah, the individuals who not knowingly buy stolen property and and it's recovered and returned, they're let go. There's no issue with them usually. It only becomes a problem if they knew it was stolen when they bought it. Now, the people who steal it, depends on what country you're in, what the amount of the value is. In the United States, the amount of jail time, amount of months in prison, is dependent on the value of the property. Because ultimately, under U.S. law, whether it's, like I said, a Monet or a Chevrolet, it's just a piece of property. And then the value is what determines the jail time. So just to give you an idea, if you steal, I had a case involving a curator from the National Money Museum, the Money Museum for the National Numismatic Association. And we were able to get him indicted on $1 million theft. He got 27 months in prison. So that gives you an idea what the time is. Now, if you use a firearm or a gun to do an armed robbery, every gun use is a 5-year minimum mandatory. So if you do, say, and then it goes 5 years and up to 20 years on the second one. So if you do 2, you can have at least 25 years in prison. So it's the use of a firearm.
So you've seen a lot of, or you've worked with a lot of art pieces, I guess, that have been lost for years, like 30 years for the ones in Boston. What is your opinion has happened to those? I mean, just by guessing.
You mean my opinion on what's happened to stuff that we've recovered?
You haven't recovered.
Haven't recovered. Well, my hope is that they exist. Sometimes pieces don't exist after many, many years. But I can tell you, I mean, one piece we recovered was an original copy of the Bill of Rights. It was stolen in 1865 by a Union trooper from the state of North Carolina. So he was with Sherman's troops coming back from Georgia, coming back north, and they stopped in Raleigh to take over the state capitol. And this trooper went in and stole the Bill of Rights that was sent there in 1789 by George Washington for ratification. Well, we recovered that in 2003. So that was going 160 years, 150 years, and we got that back. So there's always hope that we're going to have these things come back. So that's the hope.
Well, let's take another question from Vidori. What are your thoughts on U.S. collections like the J. Paul Getty Museum, the Villa, not the newer museum, that have collections or objects that the countries of origin are claiming?
Well, each of the museums have to look at what they have and abide by their own rules, by the rules, by the international laws, and make sure that they're not buying stolen property. Sometimes they do that inadvertently. They don't know they're buying stolen property. I can tell you, I had a client who had bought a Renoir, and this Renoir was sold by the client. It was a gallery, and then the person who bought it, decided to sell it again at auction. And the second time when I went back to auction, it turned out that this was a piece of Nazi looted stolen art. But it was sold 3 times. Nobody knew it until they discovered it. And ultimately, it was given back to the family in France who claimed it as Nazi stolen art. And everybody was made whole. So there's reasons that there's possibilities that people don't know that something's missing or taken illicitly, especially looted items, antiquities that come out of the ground today. Since there's no record of them, people make up fake provenances and histories and say that, this was in the States in 1960, and it's been here ever since. So these are the fake provenances that these dealers come up with. And in that situation, the museum really can't be held liable because they were told what they were told, and there's no way to check it because the antiquity is not unknown. So, I'm not saying it happened at the Getty. The Getty had a different situation. They were buying from a dealer, and it turned out this dealer had been using these tomb robbers to dig this material up. So it was a whole different situation. But that's the situation generally in museums. They don't want stolen property. It's not good for their reputations, not good for their collections. Let me say, all these stories I'm talking about today, they're all in Priceless. All these ones we're discussing. So there's chapters about each one of these different. I have about 13 different cases I talk about in Priceless.
How does property get categorized as art or as not art? And,
Well, the category is really cultural property. So, basically, if it's worth $3,000 or more, and then considered a collectible or cultural property, that's how they catalog it. So you wouldn't catalog a 2015 Chevrolet, but you might catalog a 1962, Mustang. You see what I'm saying? So it depends on the age of it and how it's looked at in the marketplace.
Thank you so much for coming to Google and speaking about these
Sure.
great stories. When I was in the Army a few years ago, there was a lot of concerns about destruction of antiquities and prized historical pieces, as well as theft from a lot of terrorist groups, as well as the results of war. I'm wondering if your organization or the FBI ever gets involved in cases like that of saving these prized stolen possessions or saving them from destruction.
Yeah, well, the FBI does can get involved in investigations of material that's stolen. Let's say from the Baghdad Museum at the time of the invasion. There's pieces that were taken at that time that are still missing, and if those pieces show up in the United States or overseas where we have a lead, the FBI could get involved in that investigation. It is illegal, and when you were in the Army, thank you for your service. At that time, there was a lot going on as far as material being dug up out of Iraq, out of the ground. So things were being sold. In fact, I recovered, I think it was about 7 or 8 cylinder seals that a Marine brought back. Thinking he had bought them, he thought they were just reproductions, but they were originals, thousands of years old. So we did recover those from the Marines. That does happen. And, we try, I think there's a lot of training now in the Army before you're deployed. With that explains what you can't bring it back, not to bring these pieces. They're considered, they're not spoils of war. It's theft. Okay, so that's what's going on today.
Was the FBI involved at all in the Swedish crown jewel heist of 2018, or do you have any comments about this art heist?
I wish we could get them back. Those crown jewels are fantastic. As far as I know, the FBI was not involved in the heist, but they might be involved in the investigation. But just to say, I think that if there's a lead, they'll follow up on it. So, but it would be great to get them back.
Super.
Right.
Thank you so much, Bob. It was a fascinating talk. Priceless. You pick it up. You cannot put it down. Reads like a thriller. Recommend it to all of you. And if you want to follow up on resources at Google dealing with these questions, check out go/artcrime. But for now, join me in thanking Bob for his time and these stories.